you're not even conscious of playing it once it starts. It takes over. It's just fun to play that one.
Keith Richards survived things that should have killed him 10 times over. In 1965, he was electrocuted on stage and flew backward in blue sparks. Everyone thought he was dead, but that was just the beginning. Someone poisoned his heroin with strychnine and left him frozen with a needle in his arm. He woke up hearing people say, "He's gone." Then came the father's ashes incident that shocked the world, and the mysterious death in his house that police still can't explain. How is he still alive at 81? The truth behind it all remained buried for decades. Keith Richards was born on December 18, 1943, in Dartford, Kent, right in the middle of World War II. The town was called Bomb Alley because German planes constantly flew over, trying to hit the factories nearby. That day, there were bombers in the sky. While his mother was in labor, air raid sirens were howling, and explosions were shaking the ground. Keith came into the world with war all around him. He later said that even decades later, whenever he heard those same sirens in old movies, it gave him chills. The world he was born into was broken, bombed, and filled with rubble. And somehow, that chaos got into his blood. His father, Herbert Richards, worked in a factory, but also served in World War II. He was badly injured during the Normandy invasion and never fully recovered. Keith's mother, Doris, was the one who brought music into the house. She played jazz records by Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong. Their home didn't have much, but it had singing. When the radio played, the whole family would join in. Keith called it a load of singers. It was warm and joyful, but not everyone supported him. His father didn't like the idea of Keith getting serious about music. He thought it was silly. Keith had a hard time in school. He struggled with reading and was later understood to have dyslexia. He didn't like sports and would run away from footballs, which embarrassed his parents. He skipped school a lot and was finally expelled from Dartford Tech in 1959 when he was just 16. But something unusual happened before that. The school choir master, Mr. Clark, saw something special in him and made him one of 3 boy sopranos. Keith sang at big events, even at Westminster Abbey for Queen Elizabeth II. Even though he couldn't keep up in class, that moment on stage made him feel like he could do something. His parents divorced in the early 1960s, but things had been rough throughout the 1950s. After the split, Keith mostly lived with his mother. He became very close to his grandfather, Gus Dupree, who had once led a jazz band called Gus Dupree and His Boys. Gus could play everything: saxophone, piano, guitar, even the fiddle. And the best part was that Gus didn't just play music. He lived it. The house was always full of old songs and family sing-alongs. Keith never forgot that. Even after becoming famous, he would write thank you notes to Gus and hang them up. Then something happened that changed everything. One day, Gus placed a guitar on a high shelf and told young Keith, "If you can reach it, you can have it." Keith climbed on books, pillows, and whatever else he could find until he finally got it. Gus taught him to play a Spanish song called Malagueña. Keith practiced it non-stop. He slept with the guitar like it was a teddy bear. That instrument became part of him. Every time he picked it up, he thought about Gus. Every song, every stage, it was always, "Thanks, Granddad." In 1961, something magical happened at a train station. Keith saw an old school friend, Mick Jagger, standing on Platform 2. Mick was holding 2 rare blues albums, Chuck Berry's Rockin' at the Hops and Muddy Waters' Best Of. Keith was stunned. Those records were hard to find. That moment started one of the most powerful friendships in rock history. Keith wrote to his aunt saying, "Mick is the greatest R&B singer this side of the Atlantic." That same day, they had tea together. Soon after, they started a band. Their first group wasn't the Rolling Stones. It was Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys. They practiced at Jagger's house until the neighbors complained, then at Keith's, then at Dick Taylor's place. They played Chuck Berry songs and even recorded some early demos in late 1961. Around this time, Keith went to Sidcup Art College. He didn't like it. The college wanted to train people to work in advertising, not to create art. Keith wasn't interested in becoming someone who made tea for ad execs. He spent most of his time in the boys' room playing guitar. By then, he had already learned most of Chuck Berry's guitar solos by heart. Keith had started ordering American blues records from Chess Records in Chicago. It was expensive and slow, but it was the only way to hear real blues. Hardly any stores in London carried that music. He would sit in his room for hours, playing along with the records, trying to copy every note. That obsession with blues wasn't just a phase. It was the foundation of everything he would later do. Back when he was still a teenager, Keith joined the Boy Scouts. He didn't care much about camping. He wanted the knife they gave out. He became the leader of his scout group, which he called Beaver Patrol. He smuggled in bottles of whiskey to a big scout event, got into a fight with some scouts from Yorkshire, and broke his hand punching a tent pole. He got kicked out soon after for punching another recruit. Even so, he said the scouts taught him leadership and survival. To make ends meet, Keith worked odd jobs, including as a postman. He would go all the way to London just to see blues bands in tiny clubs. In March 1962, he went to the Ealing Jazz Club and saw Brian Jones playing guitar under the name Elmo Lewis. Keith also met pianist Ian Stewart that night and said he had never heard a white man play like that. It was the start of something new. Brian Jones wanted to start a blues band, so he posted an ad in Jazz News on May 1962. The first people to respond were Ian Stewart, then Jagger, and then Richards. Their first practice was in a dusty upstairs room at the Bricklayers Arms pub. Keith later said that when he walked up those creaky stairs, something in him changed. By June 1962, they had a full lineup. Jagger, Richards, Jones, Stewart, Dick Taylor, and drummer Tony Chapman. Jones named the band after Muddy Waters' song Rollin' Stone. Their first gig was in July 1962 at the Marquee Club on Oxford Street. That summer, Keith, Mick, and Brian moved into a tiny, filthy flat at 102 Edith Grove in Chelsea. The place had no bathroom and only 2 rooms. The floor was covered in beer bottles, chip wrappers, and what Keith called a disgusting brown carpet. They barely ate and often survived on stolen food. When the Beatles visited the flat once, they were horrified by the mess. But it was in that awful apartment where they practiced day and night. That was where they started writing the music that would change everything. In 1963, Andrew Loog Oldham became their manager. He was young and ambitious and wanted to clean up their image. He told Keith to drop the S from Richards to make it sound more pop-friendly. For a few years, Keith was credited as Keith Richard. It seemed like a small thing, but it showed how far they were willing to go to make it in the music world. In April 1963, the Rolling Stones finally got a break. They had been rejected by almost every label until Decca Records said yes. Just 1 month later, they walked into Olympic Sound Studios and recorded their first single, Come On, in a single take. It lasted only 1 minute and 48 seconds. They were paid just $19 each from the release, even though it reached number 21 on the UK charts. But Keith Richards hated it. He said it sounded too much like the Beatles and refused to play it live. Their manager, Andrew Oldham, was so stressed he nearly broke down. What's wild is that Chuck Berry's original version had flopped in America because Berry had been in prison at the time. So the Stones picked the song only because they thought it might sell. Brian Jones added harmonica and backing vocals, and Bill Wyman sang too, but none of them actually liked the track. Then came a twist that changed everything. On September 10, 1963, Oldham ran into John Lennon and Paul McCartney stepping out of a cab. He invited them to the Stones' rehearsal, and right there in the corner of Delane Lee's studio, Lennon and McCartney finished writing "I Wanna Be Your Man" in just 20 minutes. The Stones recorded it on October 7th and released it on November 1st. It became their first top 20 hit, landing at number 12. And 3 weeks later, the Beatles released their own version. It was the only song both bands ever recorded. Even more incredible, the Stones version was the first song ever performed on BBC's Top of the Pops on January 1st, 1964. Brian Jones's slide guitar gave it a sharp, aggressive edge that made it unforgettable. In June 1964, they flew to America for the first time. Bill Wyman called it a disaster. They had no hit songs in the US yet, and the culture shock was brutal. Keith Richards was shaken by the racial segregation. In San Antonio, he kept asking to see the black neighborhood, but officials wouldn't let him. At shows, audiences were separated by ropes, white on one side, black on the other. On June 5th in San Bernardino, they played for screaming teens sitting among hay bales and cowboy hats. Dean Martin even mocked them on TV. But in Chicago, everything changed. They recorded at Chess Studios and met Muddy Waters. He welcomed them without question. That experience fueled songs like Not Fade Away. Then came the moment that would define their sound. On May 7, 1965, in a motel in Clearwater, Florida, Richards woke up in the middle of the night, grabbed his cassette recorder, and laid down a riff with the words, "I can't get no satisfaction." Then he fell back asleep. When he replayed the tape, it was 2 minutes of music, then 40 minutes of snoring. He didn't even remember recording it. They first tried it at Chess Studios on May 10th, but the final version came 2 days later in Hollywood, with Richards using a brand new fuzz pedal from Gibson. The sound was so raw that Gibson sold out of fuzz boxes by the end of the year. But on December 3rd, 1965, something terrifying happened. During a show in Sacramento, Richards accidentally touched his guitar to an ungrounded mic stand. A massive electric surge shot through him. He flew backward in a burst of blue sparks and collapsed. Everyone thought he was dead. The explosion was so loud, the promoter thought it was gunfire. He was rushed to the hospital, semi-conscious, burned, barely breathing. A doctor looked at him and said, "They either wake up or they don't." What saved him were his rubber-soled hush puppies. The next night, somehow, he was back on stage in San Jose. Around the same time, they released Get Off My Cloud. It became a #1 hit in the US, UK, Canada, and Germany. But Richards hated it. He called it a rushed job and said the production ruined it. He had wanted something slower, more soulful. Instead, it was turned into a follow-up to Satisfaction. Charlie Watts' drumming never changed rhythm the whole song. Richards was already experimenting with open guitar tunings then, which would become a signature sound. In 1967, things started falling apart. On February 12th, police raided Richards' Redlands home. They found drugs during a party. Jagger got hit with amphetamine charges. Richards was accused of allowing cannabis to be smoked in his house. Robert Fraser had 24 heroin tablets. At trial in June, the judge called them scum and filth. Jagger was sentenced to 3 months and a $100 fine. Richards got a year and $500. Richards spent a night in Lewis Prison. The police had been tipped off by someone at the party, possibly a man known only as Mr. X, who vanished before the trial. That same year, the Stones tried something wild. Their Satanic Majesty's Request was their most psychedelic album, with Brian Jones playing almost a dozen instruments. But it was chaos. Oldham quit. Jones was in a nursing home. Most of the time, not all 5 members were even in the studio. Charlie Watts said the sessions were a blur of acid. It took 8 months and cost a fortune. John Paul Jones arranged the strings. When it came out on December 8th, critics tore it apart. They said it copied Sgt. Pepper. Jagger and Richards would later mock the album, but Jones's contributions stood out. It was his final moment of brilliance before being kicked out. In December 1969, everything shattered at Altamont Speedway. During the Stones set, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death by Hell's Angel Alan Pissarro. Hunter, wearing a lime green suit, had a gun. He was high on meth. After being beaten by security, he pulled the gun. Pissarro grabbed it with one hand and stabbed him 7 times. The murder was caught on film and featured in the documentary Gimme Shelter. The Hells Angels had been paid $500 in beer to guard the concert. 4 people died that day. The violence destroyed the dream of the 60s. In 1967, Keith Richards fell in love with Anita Pallenberg. But it happened in the middle of a nightmare. He and Brian Jones had taken a trip to Morocco, and Jones beat Anita during a fight. Richards rescued her, drove her home in his Bentley Blue Lena, and she never left. That moment ended his friendship with Jones. 2 years later, Jones was fired and found dead in his pool. Richards and Pallenberg stayed together for 23 years, but it was a storm of heroin, jealousy, and tragedy. Richards even believed Jagger might have fathered their daughter Dandelion. In 1976, their son Tara died of SIDS. That grief pushed their relationship even closer to collapse. Then came Villa Nelcote in 1971. Richards moved to France to escape Britain's 93% tax on high earners. He rented a massive mansion for $20,500 a month. Nazi officers had once lived there. The Stones recorded Exile on Main Street in the basement, while wild parties raged upstairs. Richards arranged a heroin supply with Corsican dealers nicknamed Les Cowboys. It was a non-stop storm of sex, drugs, and music. But in 1973, the chaos caught up with him. After a raid, Richards and Pallenberg were charged with heroin possession and intent to traffic. France banned him for 2 years. In 1973, before a European tour, Richards went to a clinic in Switzerland to detox. He went through a $5,000 dialysis-style treatment where toxins were pulled from his blood. It worked, but he joked about it so much, people started saying he had a full blood transfusion. The myth stuck. It fit his indestructible image. But in 1977, that image cracked again. Police in Toronto found 22 grams of heroin in his hotel room. It was enough to charge him with trafficking, which meant up to life in prison. At his trial in October 1978, fans packed the courtroom. The judge said Richards hadn't stolen to support his addiction, which was rare for addicts. Instead of prison, Richards got probation and was ordered to play a charity concert for the blind. It was a turning point. That same decade, he was poisoned. Someone had laced his heroin with strychnine. He passed out cold, needle still in his arm, and everyone around him thought he was dead. He wasn't. He remembered hearing their voices saying, "He's gone," and trying to move, but being frozen. That near-death moment helped fuel the blood transfusion legend even more. After the 1967 drug raid, Richards grew paranoid. He thought someone close had tipped off the cops. The newspaper News of the World had spies following them, even possibly bugging their phones. They knew George Harrison had been at the party. Richards' inner circle felt like it was falling apart. Then came the worst. On March 26, 1976, Richards got a phone call in Paris during a show. His 10-week-old son, Tara, had died from SIDS. Pallenberg was in Geneva. Richards didn't go home. He stayed and performed. People were furious. He later said he felt he would go mad if he didn't play. Years later, he admitted he still thought of Tara every week. In 1979, tragedy struck again. 17-year-old Scott Cantrell was found dead in Richards's house, shot in the head. He was reportedly close to Pallenberg. Richards was away in Paris. His son Marlon was home. The gun belonged to Richards. Pallenberg was arrested, but cleared. It was ruled a suicide, but rumors never stopped. Some said it was Russian roulette. Others said Pallenberg wasn't even in the room. The housekeeper allegedly had to clean up drug evidence before police arrived. Finally, in 1983, on his 40th birthday, Richards married Patty Hansen. She was 27. Their wedding marked the end of the madness. With her help, he quit heroin by the late 80s. They had 2 daughters, Theodora and Alexandra. Richards later said she saved his life. He said, "I gave up heroin in 1978. I gave up cocaine in 2006. They're still together today, nearly 40 years later." Richards calls his family a big extended tribe and says they all love each other. Richards once failed his driving test 3 times. A bodyguard had to take it for him. In 1976, he crashed his Bentley at 4 a.m. after a concert. His son Marlon was in the back. He fell asleep, drove off the road, through a fence, and hit a tree. Everyone survived. But police found LSD in his jacket and arrested him on the spot. And then, in 1981, Chuck Berry punched him in the eye. Richards had gone backstage at the Ritz in New York and picked up Berry's guitar. Berry walked in, saw him touching it, and socked him. Richards called it his greatest hit and said he deserved it. They had clashed before. Berry once kicked him off stage in 1972 and dropped a match down his shirt in 1983. But Richards didn't hold a grudge. He saw it as a badge of honor. In 1988, Keith Richards had finally had enough. The tension between him and Mick Jagger had grown so thick you could cut it with a knife. While Jagger focused on his solo career, Richards decided to carve his own path. He formed a band that would be anything but ordinary. He called them the Expensive Winos. It wasn't just a funny name, it fit the vibe perfectly. The band had Steve Jordan on drums, Waddy Wachtel on guitar, Ivan Neville on keys, Charlie Drayton on bass, and Sarah Dash singing. Together they went into studios across Montreal, France, and Jamaica to create something raw and real. During those 1987 and 1988 sessions, Richards supposedly spent a fortune, mostly on wine, but the music paid off. His debut solo album, Talk Is Cheap, went gold. Take It So Hard climbed into the UK top 5. You Don't Move Me cracked the US top 20. The Winos hit the road for a 12-city American tour, including a wild show at the Hollywood Palladium on December 15, 1988, where Richards laughed about being kicked off that same stage back in 1972 during a Chuck Berry gig. Then came the moment no one thought would happen. After not touring together for 7 years, the longest break in Rolling Stones history, the band got back on stage in 1989. It started with a secret gig on August 12th at Toad's Place in Connecticut. Only 700 fans were there, each paying just $3.01, thinking it was a birthday party. But it was the Stones. The Full Steel Wheels tour launched on August 31st at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. That first show had a blackout during Shattered, and while tech crews scrambled, Jagger had to keep the crowd calm. Richards pushed the band back toward their blues roots with songs like Slipping Away. The tour ended up being their biggest yet, more than double the size of anything they did in the 60s or 70s. In 1998, Keith had a different kind of crisis. At home in Connecticut, He climbed up a chair in his private library, trying to grab a copy of Leonardo da Vinci's Study of Anatomy. But he slipped. A wall of hardback books came crashing down on him. He was 54. He broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung. The entire European tour was put on hold. Later, he joked about it. "I learned a lot about anatomy," he said, "but I didn't find the book." It was one of those strange, almost poetic accidents that somehow made perfect sense for a man like Keith Richards. In October 1992, he dropped his second solo album, Main Offender. He worked again with Steve Jordan and Waddy Wachtel. They recorded in California and New York for months, from March to September. This time, Richards leaned into reggae on songs like Eileen and Yap Yap. The album gave him full creative freedom, but it didn't perform like his debut. In the UK, it peaked at number 45. In the US, it barely made it to number 99. Still, the tour had its magic, especially the night they played the Town and Country Club in London. That performance was later released as Wino's Live in London '92. After that, Richards wouldn't release another solo album for 23 years. In 2003, everything nearly fell apart again. Mick Jagger was knighted, and Richards absolutely lost it. He was 58, and when he heard the news, he was filled with what he described as cold, cold rage. He said he was bananas over it. He even considered quitting the band's 40th anniversary tour. "They knew I'd tell them where to put it," he said about the people behind the honor. Even Queen Elizabeth skipped the ceremony. It was Prince Charles who handed Jagger the title. But by 2005, things had cooled. They recorded A Bigger Bang, which reached number 2 in the UK and number 3 in the US. Just 1 year later, in 2006, Richards had another near-death moment. While vacationing in Fiji, he climbed what he described as a gnarled low tree after a swim. His wet hands slipped. He landed hard and slammed his head on the trunk. At first, it seemed minor. A concussion, maybe. But the headaches worsened. A brain scan showed a dangerous hematoma. A neurosurgeon named Dr. Andrew Law flew over 1,700 miles to operate. Before the surgery, the doctor told him, "I might kill you today." The operation went well, but it delayed the European tour by 6 weeks. Then came April 2007. Richards casually told NME magazine that he had snorted his father's ashes. Burt Richards had died in 2002 at age 84, and 5 years later, Keith said, "I snorted my father." He explained that he mixed some of the ashes with cocaine. "My dad wouldn't have cared," he added. At first, his manager claimed he was joking, but in Life, his 2010 memoir, Richards explained the real story. A gust of wind had blown some ashes onto a table. He wiped it with his finger and sniffed it. "Ashes to ashes, father to son," he said. Life came out in October 2010 and exploded. It topped the New York Times bestseller list. At 564 pages, it didn't hold back. He described surviving poisoned heroin and detailed brutal stories of his bandmates. He wrote about sleeping with Marianne Faithfull while Jagger was still dating her. "While you're missing it, I'm kissing it," he said. He talked about girl swapping, about Anita Pallenberg, and about being a high-functioning drug user who approached addiction like a science. In 2012, even with arthritis creeping into his fingers, Richards was back on stage. He was 68 but wouldn't stop. The GR, compilation, and 50th anniversary tour were happening. He adjusted his guitar playing, changed finger positions, and used custom instruments. His guitar collection had passed 1,000. "You never finish school, man," he said. He just kept learning. Then in 2015, at 71, he surprised everyone again. He released Cross-Eyed Heart, his first solo album in 23 years. It had blues, soul, reggae, and rock. It opened with a slow acoustic track that sounded like a fever dream. Norah Jones joined him on vocals for Illusion. He even covered Gregory Isaac's Love Overdue. Critics said it felt like it was recorded in a week, and maybe that's what made it feel so real. By 2025, Richards is 81 and somehow still going. After drinking a bottle of Jack every day for decades and smoking over 500,000 cigarettes, he quit smoking around 2022. He gave up drugs. He stopped the heavy drinking. Doctors don't understand how he's alive, but he is. He helped create the Hackney Diamonds album, their first new material in 18 years. The song Angry brought them back into the charts, reaching #1 in 20 countries. And they're still touring. But there's something else people don't talk about. His musical influence goes far beyond the Stones. Jimmy Page once said, Richards was a true devotee of the Chess Records sound. Yet Richards still took shots at Led Zeppelin, saying their music felt hollow because of Bonham's drumming. Even so, Page played lead guitar on the Stones' 1986 hit, One Hit to the Body. Richards never held back. He praised Page's talent, while still calling out what didn't feel right to him. That honesty defined his style. Guitarists from Eddie Van Halen to Slash credit him as a major influence. He's also lived through more tragedy than most. At the Altamont Free Concert in 1969, an 18-year-old named Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death just 20 feet from where Richards stood. The band had to escape by helicopter. Richards also survived multiple house fires after falling asleep with lit cigarettes. One of them, in 1973, burned down his thatched roof mansion. Another happened during the exile on Main Street sessions in France. Then there was Brian Jones, the band's co-founder, who drowned in 1969 at age 27. Richards said Jones never wrote a single finished song and wasn't a great musician. Since 1985, Richards has lived quietly in Weston, Connecticut, in a colonial estate with his wife, Patty Hansen. They married in 1983. In March 2025, at age 81, he received the first Governor's Award of Excellence from Connecticut. Governor Ned Lamont gave it to him in person. Richards had moved there from New York for a healthier family life. The kids grew up wonderfully, he said. He spends his days reading, writing, and playing guitar. He's still fighting to preserve the blues through documentaries and foundations. He also owns homes in Sussex and the Turks and Caicos Islands. But it's Connecticut that gave him peace.